What is up, guys? My name's Jordan. I'm back with my old man Howie, and in this episode of the GoToGuys, we discuss one of the greatest movies of all time, The Shawshank Redemption.
Welcome to another episode of the GoToGuys. Jordan and I are here today, following up on the last episode where we really enjoyed talking about The Sopranos. We got a lot of great feedback about that episode. Today we're going to be focusing on The Shawshank Redemption. When you think about great movies over the last 30, 40 years, IMDb, some of the other rating networks that chalk up fan feedback, critics' feedback, Shawshank Redemption is universally talked about as being one of the most memorable, greatest movies of all time.
Agreed. I mean, coming from me, this movie came out how many years? I think it came out
in the early 90s.
Yeah, early 90s. I wasn't even alive, and I remember when I watched the movie for the first time, and it was just jaw-dropping.
Didn't I have to pay you to watch the movie?
Not that one.
There were a couple of movies I had to pay Jordan to watch during COVID. And honestly, I'd like to take some credit for that being the origin of Jordan getting interested in watching solid movies. There were a number of other ones. I think we watched like Forrest Gump, Patch Adams.
I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, Robin Williams. But anyway, back to The Shawshank Redemption. You know, interestingly enough, The Shawshank Redemption was written as a short story by one of the most famous American writers of all time, who usually focused on horror. His name was Stephen King. And I think it was part of like a book that had like 4 short stories. And I think one of the most interesting things about it is that when The Shawshank Redemption was released in the theaters, it was not very popular at all. I don't know if you're aware of that, Jordan.
Didn't it win like no awards? I know it came out during a time where there was so many good movies out in theaters, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought there were like 4 of like the top like 100 movies of all time out in theaters when it took place. I'm blanking on which ones they were, but for me, Shawshank Redemption is definitely one of the best, and I believe the budget was much lower than, how much it ended up making. And I think it paved the way for a lot of shows today, similar to The Sopranos, like Prison Break, for example, where, both the movie and the show take place in a prison, and it's about escaping. And, for me, my friends know, Prison Break's one of my favorite shows of all time. I probably went through it in about a month, and, seeing the comparisons to Shawshank and Prison Break, seeing them bounce off one another in very similar ways, it's just, it's awesome to see. And you could tell that this movie was, one of a kind.
It was actually released in 1994. It was nominated for 7 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture. Morgan Freeman, who played Red, was actually nominated for Best Actor, which is very interesting considering, I think when I look back on it, I always think of Andy Dufresne, the Tim Robbins role, being the lead. But I guess if you really do think about it, they were somewhat intertwined, even though the introduction to the story was Andy Dufresne, being sentenced to prison for the murder of his wife. It was nominated along with Forrest Gump, yep. Which ultimately won. I mean, when you think of this lineup of movies, it's Pulp Fiction, one of my favorite movies of all time, and revolutionary Quentin Tarantino, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, and Quiz Show. And when people look back on those 5 movies being nominated, they look at 1994 as being sort of one of the strongest years of quality, memorable movies. I think one of the interesting things about Shawshank, I alluded to it earlier, when it was released into theaters, it did not do that well during its original theatrical run. And it's one of those films that actually gained popularity over time from being shown on TV, typically on the TNT or TBS networks. But again, very memorable. I think if you can get people like Jordan to watch it, to have the patience to watch it, even though it came out way before they were born, you're always going to have people saying, wow, that was a phenomenal movie. The first thing we want to talk about, let's talk about Andy Dufresne. Again, Tim Robbins, the lead in the movie. The thing about Andy that was so interesting is that
Just normal. He seemed normal.
He's different from most people who get convicted of murder. in that his background in terms of his life and stuff was that of a professional.
Yeah, he was a banker, I believe, went to prison for supposedly the murder of his wife. And yeah, when you see him compared to like the typical prison guy in a movie, he's just a normal white Caucasian dude with no tattoos, just it's just very, very different from what you typically associate from like other prison movies. Just a normal guy that comes in, doesn't really seem like everyone else, and he's there, and you could tell there's something like different about him as the movie goes on, and you could just tell as it progresses, he's just a very smart character. You see the way he interacts with the other characters in the movie, like Red and Brooks, who we'll get into a little later, and just as the movie progresses, you just see this guy. He seems quiet. He seems a little off-putting at first, and then as the movie goes on, it just builds up to his eventual escape and reuniting with Red at the end of the movie, also played by Morgan Freeman.
Well, I think the thing that set him apart from most of the other typical prisoners is that he was an incredible thinker in terms of the way that he conducted himself. I think the other characters in the movie, when he first arrived at Shawshank, recognized that he was different. Like you said, he was always calm, despite the circumstances that he found himself in. And the thing about Shawshank, when you think back about it, and Andy's character, is that it wasn't a feel-good story for the most part. I mean, prison is difficult. There are bad people in prison. He went through circumstances where, for example, the sisters, tried to take advantage of him. Obviously, the warden and Byron Hadley, who was the lead of the prison guards, used violence to keep the prisoners in line.
And like the first scene in the movie, he literally beat a guy to basically death when he was crying over his mom or something like that. Remember the overweight guy?
Well, that was when the new batch of prisoners, which Andy was a part of, arrived at Shawshank. The institutionalized prisoners had almost a game where they would each pick one of the prisoners who they thought would be the one to crack, and Andy was picked by one of the other prisoners.
By Red.
Yep, to be the one to crack, and they would bet money, and at the end of the day they lost. But as Jordan alluded to, there was one guy who ended up, I think, dead because they beat him and stuff like that. Also, the other thing with Andy is, even though he was in prison, he still tried to create moments, not only for himself, but for the other prisoners, where he wanted them to feel normal. For example, there's some scenes that are extremely memorable. There's the one where Andy plays Mozart over the loudspeakers when he locks one of the other prison guards in the bathroom. He did that because he wanted everybody in the prison to stop for a moment, hear the music, and feel like they were not in that environment.
Including the guards themselves. I remember they all looked up to listen to it, and then, the warden or, some prison guard ended up putting up. And another scene that we could talk about is when they're all on the roof, the prisoners are on the roof. Are they tarring the roof or painting the roof or something? And Andy overhears the main prison guard talking about how he's dealing with taxes, things are up in the air. He needs the money to provide for his family. And Andy almost interrupts the conversation between the two guards and inserts himself. And he's inches away from getting pushed off the roof by one of these guards.
Well, the lead guard.
Yeah,
the lead guard, the most violent guard.
Yeah, the
Byron
most violent
Hadley.
guard. And as he's about to get pushed off, Andy says something to stop him in his tracks, says that he could almost help him out with his tax situation because Andy is a banker, he's brilliant. And next thing you know, for this favor, he has everyone on the roof getting beers for free and sitting back and feeling what it's like to be like a normal person in the jail.
Well, two things. First of all, when he plays Mozart, he gets put into solitary confinement for a period of time after he does it. And from Andy's perspective, it was well worth it. It was well worth, living through that punishment in order to create that moment. The scene on the roof, which Jordan is alluding to, is where they asked a group of prisoners to do a job outside of the prison. It was actually part of the warden's plan to use prisoners to do work outside of the prison. It ended up becoming a lucrative moneymaker for the warden. But in that particular scene, there was a group of prisoners that were selected to go to do the tarring of the roof. And as Jordan mentioned, he overheard Byron Hadley complaining that he was inheriting some money, but it wasn't a good thing because he was going to have to pay taxes. Andy stepped up, ended up filling in something for Byron Hadley and becoming of use to him. And then later in the movie, Byron Hadley communicated that to the warden, and it almost enabled Andy to create like a mini accounting firm inside
the library.
the
There's
prison.
like a library that they built. It was crazy.
Well, the library was because him and Brooks, they got to work together, and then Andy kept writing letters to try to get books donated to the prison, and I think it was the state of Maine where the movie took place. The people who were receiving the letters got so frustrated, they just sent a ton of books and said, leave us alone. But with doing the CPA work, it ended up becoming that when the prison guards had their softball season each year.
Yeah. The other like guards from other jails would come in and he would do the work for them. And then it was almost like a you scratch my back, I scratch yours. Hadley, the main prison guard, ended up beating the lead of the sisters group. And basically the sisters group is a group that goes around, in the jail.
Violently attacking other prisoners, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yes, and Hadley ends up crippling Boggs and sending him to like a medical
center. Who's the leader
center.
of the sisters.
Yes, who's the leader of the sisters. So it was very interesting. You can all basically see the human side out of the prisoners and the guards. Like Andy's just slowly bringing it out, and it just progresses towards the end of the movie, which we'll get into. But it was just very interesting seeing how this one guy, just a normal,
he sort of changed the
normal
dynamic.
banker, just changed the dynamic, made with the Mozart and providing beers getting beers for the people on the roof that he was doing the work with. You were able to see the human side.
Well, it was almost like what Jordan alluded to with Boggs, and when the prison guards found out that he was having his way with Andy on a regular basis, it was almost like the prison guards then turn on Boggs and they beat him and they paralyze him. Byron Hadley paralyzes him from the waist down, because it's almost like it's not even necessarily that they like Andy. It's because Andy provides is useful to them in doing the CPA, and then later ends up doing specific work for the warden as well. And it's a very intelligent story that's very, intelligently woven together. And, in talking about Andy's long-term planning, Red, who's one of the other premier characters in the movie, which is Morgan Freeman, he's known as the guy that can get people stuff. And I think he talks with Andy, and Andy asks him to get...
It's like a hammer, like not even like a
rock hammer.
Yeah, like a rock hammer to pick at the wall, which he eventually Andy would basically carve in the wall, counting down the number of days or writing stuff. And at one night when he's carving something in, I think it was like a tally and like crossing it out to see like how many days he has left. A part of the wall actually came off, and that slowly began the process of him chipping away at the wall, or chipping away, no pun intended, to eventually escape. And he would just keep digging and digging. And since he had all these great connections with the warden and the prison guards, no one thought anything of it. He would just be in his cell alone chipping away, and no one thought he was going to do anything bad like this. No one ever thinks a prisoner is going to go out and escape, but especially Andy being, not friends, but cordial with the guards and the other prisoners. No one expected him to do anything like this, and it kind of set it up for him to escape.
When he asked for the rock hammer, I think it's because Andy, he put out a logic that he liked to collect rocks in the prison yard. And as Jordan alluded to, when he scraped at the wall, he saw that the wall of his cell would actually come apart. And then later he also asked for, well, interestingly enough, after he had been in the infirmary for a period of time, because Boggs and the rest of what was the name of the group again?
The sisters?
The sisters had attacked him violently. Red and the rest of the guys wanted to get Andy a gift. They actually got him a poster of Raquel Welch, who was a very attractive female actress during that time period. And Andy hung the poster on the wall in his prison cell, and he used it to cover up the fact that over years, that he was chipping away at the wall and actually creating a tunnel to get out of the prison. And what he would do, it was unbelievable, and it just shows his thinking and patience, is that when he would chip away at the wall at night, he would put the stone that came off the wall in his pants. and he would walk around the prison yard and shake the rocks out of his pants. I mean, just again, incredible long-term thinking.
That doesn't even talk about his actual escape when he waits for like the lightning to strike to burst the pipe and to escape, and he leaves his clothes in the water. But yeah.
Well, in terms of bursting the pipe, he was waiting for the lightning because he was using a rock to smash a pipe that he found out would ultimately lead him to a water sewage outlet outside of the prison grounds. So not only did he have to chip at the wall, cover it up, dispose of the rocks in the prison yard, the night where he actually decided to execute his escape, I think they said he had to crawl through hundreds of yards of like sewage waste.
Yeah, he like throws up in like the pipe, like it's disgusting.
Freedom. So it's unreal. So talking a little bit more about Red, who's one of the other main characters in the movie, and he's just interesting in terms of he was put in jail at a very young age for also, I think, committing murder, and he evolved over time in prison in terms of the way he thought about things. And they show him going through in front of the parole board, a number of times on an annual basis. And the parole board, it's sort of like rubber stamping, if you could change something that you did in the past, would you do it? I think Red just looked at it as they were never going to give him the ability to get out. And I think once Andy escaped, Red thought about the fact that he could that maybe he could also get paroled out of prison. Andy had talked to him about the fact that, if something ever changes in the future, that there was a particular place, I think in Mexico, that Red should try to go to. Red was trying to figure out what the heck Andy meant by that. I think
he also said find like a box with like money in it and like tickets to go, but
that was in a location where Andy used to spend time with his deceased wife.
Yeah.
So I think Red was trying to figure out what Andy meant. I think when he spoke to some of the other prisoners, they thought that maybe he was going to try to kill himself, actually, commit suicide.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Andy asked for a rope to help him escape, and Red thought he was going to kill himself.
Well, it wasn't from Red. He asked it for one of the other prisoners that was in the also in jail with them. And then when it was mentioned to Red that he asked for the rope, then Red was like, "Oh, why'd you give up to him? He's going to do something with it." So,
and he did do something with it, just not what he exactly thought. But before we get to like the ending and Brooks, who plays a big role in the movie, I just wanted to talk about. There was a time in the movie where Andy and Red befriend this guy, Tommy, and Tommy is in the prison with them talking about, that there was this banker who killed his wife and child, and Andy realizes that story matches up perfectly with what Andy's being accused of, and Andy eventually goes to the warden and says, like, this guy Tommy, like, he provided the insight, like, I know, like, I'm innocent, like, he could back it up, and, Andy is doing all this money laundering for the warden, the prison guards, and the warden doesn't want Andy to, snitch on him in the outside world, so he can't risk Andy getting out, and he eventually places Andy back in solitary confinement and has, who's the main prison guard? Byron Hadley kill Tommy, and Andy's basically just stuck before he attempts to escape because there's no way out unless he waits for, his jail sentence to be over.
Yeah, when Tommy showed up, he was a young guy. When he showed up at the prison, it was almost, if you compare it to when Andy showed up, Andy was calm, cool, and collected. Tommy was almost like young rock and roll music. He brought this youthful vibe, and Andy and the rest of the prisoners took to him just because he had a lot of charisma. And one of the things that Andy worked on him with was getting the equivalent of his high school diploma. Yeah. And you see how they form a bond during those scenes. And it ultimately ends up when the mail comes to notify Tommy whether or not he passed and got his diploma. Andy's in solitary confinement at the time when that happens. And even the prison guards pass along to him the fact that Tommy passed. It's just a very interesting development of characters because you really take to these people, even though, like we said, all of them had done something wrong or being accused of something wrong because they ultimately ended up in prison. Mm-hmm. One of the other fascinating dynamics is the warden, whose character is developed during the course of the movie as well. we mentioned the fact that when Andy, well, he looked for ways to use the prisoners for his benefit, certainly in farming them out to other businesses in the area of the prison and getting paid for it, but also when he saw that Andy could do stuff for him, he had Andy, doing the books. And at the end of the day, what Andy was also doing is he was gathering information and putting together, so when he escaped from prison, he could visit banks in the area of the prison and actually take all the money out. Yeah. It was ironic. They show him going into the prison dressed in a suit that he took with him when he left, when he escaped. So he walks into a bank.
It was the warden suit. Exactly. and sneakers
and shoes.
Work shoes.
Yes.
And
even after Andy escaped and the news got out, and I think the warden's life was flashing before his eyes, he went into a box where Andy would typically...
It was a Bible, I think. It was a book, and he carved out the shape of the rock hammer that Red originally gave him and for Andy to escape, and that's how he would access it each night. Just because if the warden or a prison guard came into his prison cell and searched for the tool, it would never be there. It would always be in the warden's room in that little book.
That was part of what he left, but Andy also took off his shoes. He took the warden's shoes, which were shiny black shoes, and he left his old worn-out shoes.
Yeah.
And you see the warden opening the box, seeing the shoes, and then he hears the cops coming to the prison, because part of what Andy also did is he released an expose exposing the warden and Byron Hadley and what they were doing, from the standpoint of this criminal business that they were running. And then you see that the warden ultimately kills himself. So again, just, a phenomenal story. Again, we mentioned earlier that there was also a prisoner by the name of Brooks. He ran the prison library for a period of time. He had a pet bird, but he also got paroled during a part in the movie, and it showed when he got out of prison.
Yeah, I don't know how long he was in prison for, but
it was years.
He gets out of prison, and I think before he went to prison, he was used to a life where there were no cars on the road. Everyone would be walking. Like, cars weren't a big thing, and when you get out, the first scene you see of him is him walking almost like in the middle of the road or on the sidewalk, because he's just not used to having cars there, and he's not able to fit into the world. He's so used to that prison world. Even though the prison life is just, not the best life, he's just so used to it and accustomed to it, used to the people. And when he finally gets out, he just doesn't have any of those so-called friends that he has in prison, or he's able to adapt to the outside world, and he ends up taking his life. And it kind of transitions into when Red eventually gets paroled after Andy's escape. Red faces a similar dilemma.
It looks like he's going to go down a similar path initially. Yeah. Same apartment that Brooks was put in, same job bagging groceries that Brooks had. So you almost wonder if Red's not going to be able to make it through. We were saying, one of the themes of the movie, there's Mr. Jax barking, our favorite pet. But one of the themes of the movie, again, is these glimmers of hope that we alluded to, like where Mozart. Andy creates these moments with Mozart, with the beers on the roof, the Raquel Welch poster. But it's interspersed just with dark themes of being in prison. But ultimately, the way the movie ends, and I think if I'm not mistaken, after test audiences saw the movie, they had to change up the ending so it wasn't so depressing. And it ends up at the end of the movie, after Red realizes that he can't survive just bagging groceries, living a normal life.
Yeah, I think he just remembers what Andy told him. Andy, we didn't really speak on it, but Andy told him that there's a box. I don't remember what state it was in. It was maybe in Maine. And there was a box with money and tickets and a letter saying how to get to Mexico to meet up at the place that they originally talked about. And Red eventually finds the box.
Yeah, he didn't tell him what was in the box. He just
I know. I'm saying there is a box.
Go and get the box.
Yes, that he should go and get the box.
Or he should go to the spot and see what's there.
Yeah, and there was a box hidden behind like a rock wall, almost like pulling rocks off this wall. And Red eventually finds it and heads out to Mexico, and eventually
reunites with Andy.
Just reunites with Andy on this little deserted island with one boat that Andy's, clearing off.
It's the beach in Zihuatanejo, Mexico, where Andy had gotten a boat, and he had mentioned to that. And it wasn't a boat that was functioning, basically. It was a boat that Andy was like sanding down and painting and wanted to pass the days finding peace in doing this and hopefully eventually getting it to sail. So the movie ends with them hugging on the beach in Zihuatanejo, Mexico. And it's a triumphant ending to a movie with ups and downs, as we mentioned. And I think when I think about that movie, I almost wonder if they could ever do like a short sequel where they show what Red and Andy do when they're living in Zihuatanejo together.
Yeah, and it's crazy, like, watching that movie and then watching, Prison Break. It's the exact same concept. It's like the main character in Prison Break, Michael Scofield, he's just like an innocent engineer, and he goes to this prison, provides hope for so many different inmates, and he eventually escapes with them, which is it's basically just an extended version of Shawshank Redemption. And I think that's just one example of a show that, Shawshank Redemption paved the way towards, similar to The Sopranos and like Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul. It's just watching both the movie and the show, you just see the connections. It's just awesome for someone like me to watch a movie that came out in the 1990s and a show that came out, when I was born, and it's awesome.
No, definitely a great movie. I think it's brought sort of, I wouldn't say joy to a lot of people. It's brought entertainment to a lot of people. It's been memorable. It's still shown on TV countless times, and it's just one of those movies that you say when you're going around the dials, regardless of what point the movie's at, you're probably going to keep it on. So, great to talk about. It was great to talk about The Sopranos. I didn't even get to complain the fact that we're still looking for our first sponsor. By the way, we're also now on YouTube. We're currently uploading the audio versions of the podcast on YouTube. We're eventually also going to move to video. Again, we appreciate watching. The amount of listens we've been getting on the show have been increasing with every episode. I think that's a pretty good sign. Most importantly, we enjoy doing it together. So what we're going to do is when we circulate the link today, we're going to ask people to like and follow the YouTube page.
Subscribe.
Absolutely.
And, big week for the GoToGuys before we end. We're going to try to get in another podcast on Wednesday. We have Fanatics Fest Thursday through Saturday. So we'll be there. If you see us, shout us out, come up to us. We're going to try to do some interviews with some fans, some non-fans, to post on our social media and get that back up going again. We'll be at Yankees-Dodgers Friday night, Saturday night main event, WWE Saturday night. And, we'll be continuing with the podcast over the next couple weeks and the future. So a lot of good things to look forward to, and enjoy the World Cup.
The World Cup, the semifinals, the finals next Sunday. We appreciate you tuning in, and we hope that you'll tune in next time for another episode of the GoToGuys.